In a boxing gym filled with sweat and pride, a silent story of strength is about to unfold. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments. The boxing gym smelled of sweat, leather, and disinfectant. The rhythmic sound of gloves slamming against heavy bags filled the air, punctuated by the echo of coaches barking instructions and the grunts of young fighters pushing themselves past exhaustion. It was a place of noise, energy, and competition. And yet, within all that chaos, there was someone who remained silent, unnoticed by most. Her name was Lorraine, a black woman in her 40s, with short braided hair and strong arms. She wore faded work clothes and carried a mop and bucket. To the fighters, she was just the cleaner, the one who swept up the chalk dust and wiped away the sweat from the mats after long training sessions. Most never thought twice about her, but Lorraine carried with her a history few knew. Years ago, she had stood in the spotlight, her name called out to cheering crowds. She had fought in cages and rings across the country, earning victories through grit, skill, and unbreakable determination. She had once been a master of mixed martial arts, a competitor who had put fear into her opponents with her relentless drive. Yet time, circumstance, and personal battles had pulled her away from that life. The gym was now just a place where she earned her paycheck quietly, pushing the mop instead of wearing gloves. Every evening, when the lights dimmed and the last fighters went home, Lorraine would sometimes pause and look at the empty ring. Her eyes would linger there, remembering. But she never let herself dwell too long. Those days were behind her, or so she told herself. Among the trainers, there was one man who always seemed to notice her more than anyone else, but not with kindness. His name was Thomas. A tall, broad-shouldered coach with a shaved head and a reputation for pushing his athletes brutally hard. He had skill, no one denied that, but he also had a cruel streak. And when it came to Lorraine, that cruelty often turned into something sharper, uglier, fueled by the prejudice he carried. "Careful not to slip on the floor, boys," Thomas would shout across the gym, loud enough for everyone to hear. "The cleaning lady's out here, and she might miss a spot." Laughter would ripple through the younger fighters. Lorraine would say nothing. She would just keep working, shoulders squared, her mop moving steadily across the mat. "Hey, Lorraine," Thomas once sneered as she walked past with her bucket, "tell me something. You ever try boxing? Or are you only good with a broom?" His voice dripped with sarcasm. Some of the fighters chuckled nervously, looking between the two, not sure whether to join in or stay silent. Lorraine met his eyes briefly, then turned away. She had no interest in trading words with him. Her silence only fueled his behavior. To Thomas, her refusal to respond was weakness. It gave him more reason to taunt, to demean, to remind everyone that in his eyes she was beneath them. The truth was that Lorraine had long ago learned the power of restraint. She had fought her wars inside cages. She didn't need to fight another outside of them. She told herself it was better this way. Better to let him talk, better to avoid the conflict. She needed the job. She needed the quiet routine. But still, each insult struck something deep inside. There were days when Thomas would deliberately walk across the mat she had just cleaned, his boots leaving smudges. "Missed a spot?" he'd mutter with a smirk, forcing her to redo the same section while the fighters looked on. Other times, he would use her presence to make a point to his students. "See, discipline matters," he barked during one practice. "If you don't work hard, you'll end up like her, cleaning up after the real fighters." The words hung heavy in the air. Lorraine kept her face calm, but her jaw tightened. She never showed him her anger. Not once. At night, alone in her small apartment, she sometimes replayed the moments in her mind. Not with regret for staying silent, but with a strange mix of emotions, a sting of humiliation, a flicker of the old fire, and the ache of knowing she was capable of so much more than the life she was living. And yet, every morning she returned. Back to the smell of sweat and leather, back to the echo of gloves striking bags, back to the ring where young fighters dreamed of glory, and back to Thomas, whose mocking eyes always seemed to follow her. Day after day she endured it. Day after day she swallowed her pride, until the moment would come when her silence could no longer hold. But, for now, Lorraine said nothing. She kept her head down, her mop steady, her dignity intact, even as the sting of humiliation grew sharper with each passing insult. The gym was a place of strength and pride for many. For her, it was a place of patience, and patience has limits. Morning bled into afternoon as the gym cycled through its daily rhythm. Jump ropes slapping the floor in syncopated whips, the thud-thud of heavy bags, the brittle squeak of shoes pivoting on resin-dusted mats. Lorraine moved through it with her usual steadiness, wringing out the mop, stacking fresh towels, swapping a cracked spray bottle for a new one. She kept her gaze level, attentive to the simple order of things, trash bins emptied, mirrors wiped, corners swept. The routine's quiet structure held her together like laces pulled tight. Eyes up, chin down, no, down. Thomas barked across the ring at a teenage southpaw, then, as if tugged by a magnet, glanced toward Lorraine. He let his stare linger just long enough for a few fighters to follow it. Careful, fellas. Don't let the janitorial department outwork you. The boys laughed. Short, uncertain bursts that died in their throats when the teenager on the bag clipped himself on the chin and yelped. Thomas smirked. See? Distraction. Clean floors and messy focus. Not my fault. Lorraine didn't look up. She wrung the mop again, the rusty clamp squealing. She had learned the value of not giving a heckler his echo. The soundless refusal was its own shield, a wall that forced his words to fall back on him like dull sparks. But over the next week, Thomas pressed harder, as if her silence gave him permission to fill it. He let small jabs become routines. When she crossed the edge of the ring with a fresh stack of towels, he called, loud enough for the far wall to hear, "Hey, Lorraine, ever think about getting in a round? Maybe the towels could coach you." A couple of amateurs chuckled. One, older fighter, kept his eyes down, guilty and still. Lorraine set the towels in their bin and walked away. Another day, she had just finished disinfecting the speed bag platform when Thomas sent a rookie to check if the help missed a spot. The kid dabbed his finger along the polished wood, showed an imaginary smear, and shook his head with theatrical disappointment. Thomas played along. Tisk, tisk. Standards, gentlemen. Standards. By the third day of this new pattern, the room had learned its cues. When Thomas tossed the joke, a handful of voices caught it and threw it back with laughter. The laughs made the next joke easier, and the next. It was a small economy, cruelty traded like tokens. Lorraine continued sweeping, her jaw set, her movements unbroken. Late on a Wednesday, as sparring pairs rotated, Thomas leaned on the ropes and pitched his voice to Carrie. "Tell me something, Lorraine. You ever try to put on gloves? Or you only train with a mop handle?" He wanted her to answer, wanted any answer at all. Lorraine didn't give him one. She turned, lifted a bag of laundry, and walked it to the back hallway where the industrial washer thrummed. The door swung closed behind her, sealing out the laughter like a wave sliding off glass. The next morning, the gym was busier than usual. A local amateur tournament loomed that weekend, and Thomas had packed the schedule with last-minute rounds. He strutted between rings, stopwatch bouncing against his chest, and made a show of being everywhere at once. When Lorraine rolled out the cart with the fresh disinfectant, Thomas intercepted her with a whistle. "Hey, Lorraine," he called. School the boys in footwork, show 'em how you dance between spills." A ring of smirks formed and dissolved as fighters drifted to their stations. The old fighter with gray at his temples watched her with a quiet apology she didn't accept or reject. She had no interest in collecting contrition from the sidelines. By lunch, Thomas's provocation had matured into a plan. He liked an audience for his authority, and a gym at noon provided the right crowd: a half-dozen ambitious teenagers, 3 serious amateurs, a pair of city cop hobbyists, plus a few newcomers attracted by the weekend buzz. He clapped his hands and called everyone to the main ring for a short clinic on closing distance against a longer opponent. It was as much performance as instruction. Lorraine was wiping down a mirror opposite the ring when Thomas raised the volume. "But look," he said, pacing along the ropes, "none of that matters if your mentality is soft. If you can't step into pressure, you'll always fold. That's the difference between contenders and, well, support staff." A few laughs rolled through the group. Looser now, less hesitant, Thomas turned his head. "Lorraine, you listening? Good, because confidence is the key. In fact, let's put a little confidence on display." Conversations stilled. A couple of phones tilted upward, reflexively ready to record anything that looked like drama. Thomas extended a glove toward her as if offering a handshake. "How about a quick round?" He smiled in a way that was all teeth and no warmth. "No pressure. 30 seconds. I'll go light." Lorraine held his stare for 2 beats. No more. "No, thank you," she said, calm and even. "I'm working." "Working?" He feigned confusion. "We're all working. I'm working on their timing. You could work on yours." "Not interested," she said, and went back to the mirror, erasing a fog of fingerprints with a steady circular motion. A ripple moved through the crowd, the way a wind passes over a field, bending, then straightening. Someone muttered, "Come on, it's just for fun." Another voice said, "If she doesn't want to," and fell quiet when Thomas lifted his palm. "Let it be educational, then," he said, face turning bright with jovial condescension. "Lesson 1. Pressure reveals the truth." He stepped through the ropes and down to the floor. Lorraine kept her eyes on the mirror. It showed a dim reflection of Thomas coming closer, the bulk of his shoulders, the purposeful set of his mouth. She was not afraid, but she registered the variables: the ring at her right, the mat at her feet still damp from disinfectant, the cluster of onlookers fanning into a semicircle. Her chest rose and fell once, measured. Thomas stopped beside her. Up close, his breath smelled of coffee and mint gum. "Are you refusing?" he asked. "Because you can't? Or because you won't?" "I'm refusing," Lorraine said, "because I said no." He laughed a short bark. "You hear that?" he called over his shoulder. "We got boundaries in here. New concept for a gym." A couple of boys laughed too loudly. The sound cracked something paper-thin in the air. Thomas clicked his tongue. "All right, new lesson." He gestured at the floor she had already cleaned. "Focus and pride. 2 things you need for any job." He intentionally stepped onto the still wet square, grinding his heel to leave a muddy half circle. "You missed a spot." Lorraine looked at the mark, then at him. Her voice stayed level. "I'll handle it after you move." "You'll handle it now," he said, and rolled his shoulder as if warming a rotator cuff. "Because in here, I set the pace." She didn't move. The semicircle around them tightened by an inch. The gray-templed fighter shifted his weight, ready to step forward, then stopped himself, knowing how quickly Thomas could turn the room on anyone who broke rank. The rookies stood on the tips of their shoes, hungry for a moment to retell later. Thomas took another half step, close enough that the brim of his cap cast a shadow across her cheek. "Tell you what," he said softly, pitched for her alone. "You take a swing. I'll even let you land the first one. Then we'll see." Lorraine did not raise her hands. "Step back," she said. "Please." The please wasn't submission. It was a last offer to keep dignity intact, his and hers. It was the kind of please that places a lid over boiling water and gives you a chance to turn down the heat. Thomas took it for weakness. "Or what?" he said. He moved without warning, just a bump of his shoulder, a short, sharp push that sent her back one step onto the damp mat. The cart rattled. A bottle of disinfectant tipped and clattered to the floor. Then, as though punctuating a lesson, he snapped a quick glove across her face. Not full power. He didn't need power. He wanted spectacle. The glove kissed her cheekbone and split the corner of her lip. A flash of copper hit her tongue. The gym fell into a pressure silence, the kind that compresses sound into a tight coil. The squeak of a rope pulley, the buzz of a fluorescent tube, the soft gasp of someone near the water cooler, each noise landed like a pin on velvet. The boys who had laughed froze mid-smile, as if caught by a camera flash that never clicked off. Lorraine steadied herself with one hand on the cart. The sting on her cheek bloomed and settled, bright and then dull, and the taste of blood made a small heat behind her teeth. She inhaled once, deep and even, and lifted her gaze to him. Thomas's expression shifted in a flicker, from mockery to triumph to something like surprise at how utterly quiet she stood. He had expected a flinch, a plea, maybe tears. He got stillness. The gray-templed fighter took a half step forward. "Coach," he started. Thomas didn't look at him. "It's fine," he said to the room, loud again, claiming the stage. "We're learning about consequences. You disrespect the gym, you get corrected. That's life." Lorraine dabbed her lip with the back of her wrist and glanced down at the bottle on the floor. It lay at an angle, rocking faintly until, after 2 soft taps, it stilled. She set the bottle upright. The motion, small and exact, seemed to amplify the stillness around them. "Leave it," Thomas said. "You got bigger things to worry about now." She met his eyes, and for a single, cutting beat, he saw something he hadn't anticipated. Not fear, not bravado, but a measured focus, as if a door he hadn't known existed had just swung open behind her gaze. He felt it like a draft on the back of his neck. Someone near the ring coughed. A phone camera slipped up over a knuckle. A jump rope, nowhere near the confrontation, fell from a hook and hit the floor with a soft clatter. Thomas adjusted the cuff of his glove. "Last chance," he said, trying to lace the moment with humor and owning it before it owned him. "You want to show these boys how to move, or you want to keep playing house?" Lorraine's voice came out low and even, carrying further than loud talk often does. "I said no," she repeated, "and I meant it." Then she straightened the cart's handle, aligning it with the edge of the wall the way she always aligned things. Her hands were steady. He smiled again, wider now, more brittle. "Fine," he said. "Then we do it my way." He stepped closer, erasing the last inch of space. The glove brushed her shoulder as deliberately as a signature. The semicircle tightened one more time. The boy at the edge of the group whispered, "Coach, maybe," and swallowed the rest when Thomas lifted a finger without looking. Lorraine took in the whole room at a glance, the distance to the ring apron, the damp square of mat, the cluster of bodies with nowhere to go, the straight line from the cart to the wall, the shine of fluorescent tubes in the mirror she had just cleaned. She set the mop head inside the bucket and let the handle lean against the lip. The mop did not fall. Thomas rolled his neck, vertebrae popping like knuckles. "Lesson 2, he announced, angling his body to show the room his profile. You can't hide forever. Pressure finds you." He brought his glove up again, a small, sharp motion, the kind that doesn't ask permission because it expects compliance. The gym held its breath. The push had broken the surface. The punch had drawn the line. The silence that followed drew out like a taut wire, humming on the edge of a note. Lorraine felt the hum run along her bones, through her ribs, into her hands. She did not answer with words. She didn't move yet, either. The air between them thinned to something weightless and electric, the way air feels just before thunder. Then Thomas reached for her again. The moment his glove brushed her shoulder again, something inside Lorraine shifted. For weeks she had endured his mockery, swallowing the sting of every word, letting silence carry her dignity. But the shove, the strike to her face, the taste of blood on her tongue, that was the spark. The restraint she had held like steel cables finally snapped. She didn't announce herself. She didn't warn him. She simply moved. One instant she was standing against the cart, still as stone, and in the next she exploded forward, her hips dropping low, her body cutting through space like a knife. She shot in on Thomas's legs with the kind of speed and precision that only comes from years of training at the highest level. Gasps rippled through the gym as the sight registered. The cleaner, the silent woman, diving into a perfect double-leg takedown. Thomas barely had time to sprawl. She had already wrapped his thighs, lifted, and drove through with her shoulder. The smack of his back hitting the mat thundered through the room. For a split second, the fighters around them froze, their faces a mixture of disbelief and awe. The janitorial staff had just executed a world-class maneuver. Lorraine didn't pause to let it sink in. She flowed with the movement, sliding into position, her weight anchored, her grip tightening like iron around Thomas's body. He grunted, scrambling, swinging wild, but his power meant little against her leverage. She controlled his hips, stepped over, and within seconds transitioned to his back. Her arms snaked around his neck, smooth and precise, as if every muscle remembered what her pride had tried to forget. "Stop struggling," she murmured through clenched teeth, though her voice was calm. "It's over." But Thomas, prideful and furious, refused to yield. He clawed at her arms, twisted his shoulders, tried to buck her off. Lorraine adjusted with cold efficiency, tightening the rear naked choke. Her forearm pressed beneath his jaw, her bicep closing off one side, her own shoulder sealing the other. She squeezed with controlled pressure, not reckless, not cruel, but undeniable. The gym held its breath. No one moved, no one spoke. Every sound, the squeak of his shoes scraping the mat, the muffled growl in his throat, the pounding of his fists against her arms echoed too loudly in the silence. Then came the signs. His motions grew weaker, his fists tapping slower against her forearm. His face, once red with rage, shifted to a pale flush. His knees trembled, then slackened. His arms flailed once more before falling to the mat. His body sagged under her control, and then stillness. Thomas was unconscious. Lorraine released him immediately, her training guiding her. She eased his body onto the mat, rolled him to his side in recovery position, and stood up, her chest rising and falling with deep, steady breaths. She didn't raise her arms in victory. She didn't smile or gloat. She simply looked down at him, a man who had mistaken silence for weakness, now lying defeated at the hands of the woman he had mocked. The fighters around the ring erupted, not with cheers but with stunned disbelief. Phones were raised higher, recording every second. Whispers shot like sparks through the room. "Did you see that takedown? She choked him out, like it was nothing. She knew exactly what she was doing." One of the amateurs, eyes wide, said, "That wasn't just luck. That was skill. Real skill." Lorraine wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, smearing away the thin line of blood. Her eyes scanned the gym, not in challenge but in calm acknowledgement. For the first time, she didn't lower her head. She stood tall, letting them see her, not as the woman with a mop, but as the fighter she had always been. Thomas groaned faintly on the mat, beginning to stir. A few of his students rushed to check on him, lifting his shoulders, fanning air across his face. Lorraine didn't move closer. She had already said all that needed to be said, not with words, but with action. The silence broke into nervous chatter, awe laced with shock. The narrative of who Lorraine was had changed in an instant, though the full truth had yet to be revealed. The cleaner had become something else in their eyes, a woman capable of silencing even the loudest voice in the gym. And though Lorraine turned to collect her cart, her movements measured, her breathing steady, inside her chest a different fire burned. Not anger now, but release. For the first time in years, she had felt her old self awaken. The fighter was still there. The champion had never disappeared. Behind her, Thomas lay defeated on the mat, the symbol of arrogance undone. Ahead of her, the gym buzzed with questions that would not stop until they had answers. The gym had never been this silent. Even the hum of the fluorescent lights above seemed sharper, louder, like the whole building was holding its breath. Thomas lay on the mat, still regaining his senses, while Lorraine stood beside her cart, her hand steadying the handle as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But everyone in the room knew better. They had just witnessed something that would change everything inside these walls. The first whisper cut through the silence. "Did you see her form?" one of the teenagers muttered, his eyes wide as if he had just seen a ghost. "That choke, she knew exactly what she was doing." Another fighter shook his head, disbelief etched on his face. "No, not just knew. That was professional. That was like someone who's done it at the highest level." The words spread quickly, bouncing off the walls. More voices joined in, overlapping, each one more certain than the last. The myth was already being built. "I swear I've seen her name before." "Yeah, I remember. Lorraine. She fought years back, didn't she?" "I think she was a champion in MMA. My uncle used to talk about her." Phone screens lit up as the younger ones began to search. They whispered over the results, their voices climbing higher as the truth surfaced. "Oh my God, it's her! She fought in the Nationals. Look, here's the video." She was undefeated for years. One by one, heads turned toward Lorraine. She wasn't just the woman with a mop anymore. She was someone whose name had once been called in arenas, whose fists had once raised belts high in the air, whose picture had once been plastered on posters. The revelation swept through the gym like fire through dry grass. Even those who had laughed at her before now stared with something else in their eyes, something closer to awe. The silence that had followed her for months in this place was broken, replaced by murmurs of respect, fragments of recognition, and a swelling curiosity. Thomas groaned as he sat up, his face pale, his pride more broken than his body. He pushed away the hands trying to help him, his jaw tight, his glare fixed on the floor. For the first time he had no words. The man who had mocked her endlessly had been stripped of his authority, exposed in front of everyone. Lorraine didn't gloat. She didn't even look his way. She rolled her cart forward, her steps even, her head high. The mop handle rattled softly against the bucket as she walked, the sound carrying strangely loud in the hushed gym. One of the younger fighters broke the silence. "Miss Lorraine, is it true? Were you a champion?" His voice was hesitant, almost reverent. Lorraine paused. She turned, her gaze calm but firm. "I fought," she said simply. "Once." The words weren't boastful, but they carried a weight that silenced the whispers. She didn't need to explain further. Her actions had already told the story. A trainer who had worked alongside Thomas for years stepped forward, his tone different now, careful, respectful. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Lorraine met his eyes. "Because I didn't need to," she said. "What I was before, that was another life. I came here to work, not to relive the past." The fighters looked at her differently now. The cleaner they had dismissed was gone, replaced by a woman whose presence commanded the same respect as any coach in the room, perhaps more. Even those who had laughed the loudest at Thomas's jokes couldn't bring themselves to meet her gaze. Thomas finally stood, swaying slightly, his breath still uneven. His students looked at him, waiting for some explanation, some defense, but no words came. He wiped the sweat from his forehead and avoided her eyes. His usual arrogance dissolved into silence. The masks had been torn off. Lorraine was no longer invisible, no longer a target for ridicule. She was revealed, exposed in her truth, and that truth burned brighter than any insult Thomas could throw. And the gym, once complicit in his cruelty, now shifted around her like a tide, voices rising in respect, in questions, in the beginning of something new. Lorraine said nothing more. She only turned back to her work, knowing the silence she kept now was no longer a shield, it was power. The days that followed the fight rippled through the gym like shockwaves. The memory of Lorraine taking Thomas down and putting him to sleep replayed in every corner, in every whispered conversation. For years she had been invisible, just the woman with a mop, the one who cleaned after the real fighters. But now, whenever she walked into the room, heads turned. Fighters who once ignored her now straightened their backs, some even nodding respectfully. Others stared in silence, unsure how to act around her, as if they had only just realized they'd been living beside a legend. Lorraine herself carried on quietly. She arrived on time, cleaned as usual, set towels in their places, but the difference was in the air around her. The same mop bucket rolled across the mats, yet the weight of her presence shifted the room. Even the younger fighters who had laughed at Thomas's jokes before now gave her space, sometimes even rushing ahead to move equipment so she wouldn't have to. Then, one afternoon, as she was wiping down the mirrors, a girl no older than 16 approached her. She had braided hair and a shy expression, her gloves dangling loosely from her hands. "Miss Lorraine," she asked softly, "will you show me how you did that? The move? The choke?" Lorraine hesitated, her rag still pressed against the glass. She turned and saw the girl's eyes, hopeful, hungry to learn. Around her, a few more fighters lingered, pretending to busy themselves with jump ropes or bags, but their ears tilted toward the exchange. Lorraine sighed quietly. She set the rag down. "It's not just about the choke," she said. "It's about control, about staying calm when someone bigger thinks they can break you." The girl's eyes lit up. Lorraine motioned for her to follow. They stepped onto the mat, and for the first time since the incident, Lorraine sank into a stance not as a fighter, but as a teacher. She showed the girl how to grip, how to keep her weight low, how to move with intention instead of panic. The lesson was short, but it drew a crowd. Soon, half the gym had gathered around the mat, watching silently as Lorraine's voice carried, low, steady, confident. It became routine. The next day, the same girl returned, this time with 2 friends. The day after that, more gathered. At first, Lorraine resisted, insisting she was only there to work. But the demand grew, and soon she found herself leading small groups, teaching fundamentals, correcting posture, demonstrating techniques with the ease of someone who had lived them thousands of times before. Word spread beyond the gym. Girls who had never considered stepping into a ring began showing up, encouraged by the idea that someone like them, someone dismissed, underestimated, even ridiculed, could stand tall and powerful. Lorraine's classes became a fixture, drawing not only beginners but also experienced fighters who wanted to sharpen their craft under her watch. Meanwhile, Thomas lingered at the edges. He no longer barked jokes or comments when she passed. He watched in silence, his pride gnawed raw. He couldn't deny what he saw. Fighters who once looked only to him now drifted toward her. Respect that had been his by default now belonged to her by right. On a Friday evening, when the gym was crowded, Lorraine finished a session with a group of young women. They bowed their heads to her in gratitude, their eyes glowing with admiration. The room echoed with the sound of bags and pads, but at the center of it all, she stood as the focus, no longer the shadow in the background. She didn't ask for this. She didn't seek it, but it had come to her all the same. The gym had once been a place of humiliation, but now it was becoming something else, a place of rebirth. Lorraine was no longer the silent cleaner. She was a leader, a mentor, and for the first time in years, she felt her past and present converge into something whole. From the corner, Thomas watched, his jaw clenched. He said nothing, but in his silence was the weight of a man who knew he had been dethroned. And Lorraine, standing tall in the center of the mat, didn't need to look at him. His silence told her enough. The gym buzzed with its usual rhythm, but something fundamental had changed. Weeks had passed since the day Lorraine had silenced Thomas in front of everyone. In that time, her presence had grown from quiet respect to outright reverence. Fighters came early to secure a place in her classes. Parents brought their children, saying they wanted them to learn not just strength, but dignity from her. Even seasoned athletes bowed their heads slightly when she walked by. Lorraine had not sought this. She still arrived with the same work clothes, still cleaned the mirrors and wiped the mats. But when she stepped onto the floor to demonstrate a technique, the room fell into absolute focus. Her voice had weight now, not because it was loud, but because it was steady, precise, and earned. Thomas had kept his distance. At first, he lingered in the corners, watching her sessions with an expression that flickered between bitterness and shame. His barked commands to his own students lacked their old bite. They rang hollow in comparison to her quiet authority. Day by day, he seemed to shrink into the background, his arrogance dissolving into silence. One evening, long after most had left, Lorraine was finishing up stacking pads against the wall. The gym was quiet, the heavy bags swaying gently from the day's use. She heard footsteps behind her and turned. It was Thomas. For a moment, neither spoke. He stood with his hands shoved into his pockets, his head slightly lowered, the usual smirk absent from his face. The silence stretched, broken only by the creak of a chain from a bag overhead. Finally, Thomas spoke, his voice subdued, almost hoarse. "I was wrong." Lorraine raised an eyebrow, saying nothing. He took a step closer, his shoulders slumped. "All that time, I mocked you. I disrespected you. I thought it made me stronger to tear you down. But it was just me hiding from the fact that you had something I didn't." Her expression didn't change. She waited. "I envied you," he admitted. The words seemed to scrape his throat raw. "Your control, your skill, the way you carried yourself. I tried to bury it under insults, but that day, you showed me what real strength looks like, and I—" His voice cracked slightly. "I deserved what you did to me." He lifted his head finally, meeting her eyes. "I'm sorry, truly, for every word, every insult. I can't take them back, but I can tell you I was wrong." The gym was empty, but his voice carried like a confession. For the first time, Thomas wasn't the trainer commanding attention. He was just a man, stripped of pride, asking for forgiveness. Lorraine studied him for a long moment. She could still feel the echoes of his insults, the sting of his glove against her face, the weight of humiliation she had endured. But she also saw the sincerity in his eyes now, the rawness of a man who had been broken and humbled. "You can't erase the past," she said finally, her voice calm but firm. "Respect isn't given, it's earned. You lost it because of how you treated me, and you'll only get it back by changing how you treat others." Thomas nodded slowly. "I understand." She turned away, stacking the last pad, then looked back at him. "I don't need your apology to know who I am. But if you're sincere, then prove it. Not to me. Prove it to them. To every fighter you teach. Show them the respect you never showed me." He swallowed hard, then nodded again, his voice quiet. "I will." For the first time, there was no arrogance in him, no pretense, just sincerity. He bowed his head slightly before turning to leave. Lorraine watched him go, then turned off the last light in the gym. As she stepped out into the cool night air, she breathed deeply, the silence around her no longer heavy but full of possibility. She had come into this place invisible, ridiculed, dismissed. Now she stood not as the cleaner in the background, but as the leader, the teacher, the symbol of strength. The fighters respected her. The community embraced her, and even her enemy had lowered his head in repentance. Lorraine smiled faintly to herself. This was her new chapter, not just reclaiming her past, but shaping the future. Inside those gym walls, she was no longer overlooked. She was a name once more, a presence, a force, and above all, she was a reminder. Strength is not in arrogance nor in cruelty, but in dignity, endurance, and the power to haze when others try to push you down. This story proves that true strength is more than fists. It's dignity and respect. Subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments.